All right, that was an excerpt from a real speech that was automated with the computer voice and that kind of stuff. And hopefully, if you could not understand the urbanized version of that voice, there was a subscript here for you to read. All right, so does anyone know what speech does that particular, do those phrases and clauses come from? What's that?
Moses.
It comes from Moses?
No, I got it.
Okay, so I'm asking, first of all, who was the speaker? I want to be clear. We'll start at basic, and then we'll go from there. The speaker was who? Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That's important because we'll come back to that in just a second because your point is the next point that we'll make, all right? So what speech was that taken from? Okay, so I just want to tell you that Martin Luther King had more than one speech. All right? And this is the funny thing about the work that we do is that a lot of times people will say, well, isn't that diversity stuff done? You know, aren't we diverse yet? You know, we've heard Dr. King's stuff. We know I have a dream, sit next to people that look different from you and all that stuff. That's the stuff that we've heard. And people say that they're tired of it. But most people don't know it. Most people don't know it. So they're tired of stuff that they don't know. So we'll talk about that later too, and why people don't know. All right? So Dr. Martin Luther King, what was the hook in the song? What was the hook? You know, the chorus part. What's that? I've been to the mountaintop. I've been to the mountaintop. So what do you think, where do you think the speech comes from? From the mountaintop. Yes, it's the mountaintop speech. You guys are brilliant. Right? So it comes from the mountaintop speech. Now, what do you know about the mountaintop speech? Well, first of all, let's talk about some of the themes that he talks about in this speech. What are some of the things that keep coming up as he talks about this? The difficult days ahead. What else? He doesn't fear any man. That he won't go there with us. Right? He keeps saying, I'm not going to go there with you. And we'll get to your point in just a second because that's the next point. But this, the most interesting thing about this is that this man is having this speech. He's giving this speech. And he's talking about, he feels something in his spirit. He said, you know, we're going to get to the promised land, but I won't get there with you. I'm not going to go. Right? Now, the ironic thing, and every time I hear excerpts of this speech, or I hear the speech in its entirety, or I think about the speech, chills run down my spine. Because he gives this speech the day before, the night before, he gets assassinated. So he wakes up the next morning, has breakfast, he stands on the balcony, boom, he's gone. The night before, he in some ways prophesied his demise. So I get chills every time I hear this, right? But let's listen to some of the themes that he gives. So because he compares himself to whom? To Moses. And so he compares himself to Moses. And what else? Who else does he compare? What's the other comparison that gets made? He said promised land. Who else was seeking the promised land? The Israelites, the children of Israel, right? So he compares himself to Moses. You know, anybody seen the Ten Commandments? I have. I see it every Easter, right? Let my people go. You know, Charlton Heston. From my cold dead head. No, that's from the Planet of the Apes. I get those confused all the time. Right? So in that movie, right? Moses is the man because he leads all of these people out of Egypt, out of harm's way, and into this new place called the Promised Land. But the problem is that Moses can't enter into the Promised Land. And so, if we follow that story, do the Israelites get to the Promised Land and say, "Oh, we're there. We can't go in now, but we're here"? Is that what typically happens? No. Okay. Would you spend 40 years in the wilderness, get to the Promised Land, and be like, "Oh, that looks great. That Promised Land is super," but never go in? Right? Anybody just walk past the Coach store and not going in? Right? She's like, no. Right? My weakness is Godiva. My weakness is Godiva. I'm assuming you guys have Godiva in the malls up here. And I joined the club, so you get like a free taste every time you come, kind of thing. So that's my thing. So what ends up happening is that Moses is kind of taking off the scene. The children of Israel are kind of standing outside the Promised Land. And so there are some people who want to go, and there are some people who don't want to go. And so they said, okay, we're going to draw straws and send some people into the land to see what the land is like. And so they send these two guys, come back with this report. They go in, Joshua and Caleb. And what they say to the people is, "Oh my goodness, this is the land of milk and honey. There are grapes the size of a man's hand. I mean, this is the best place we can go and be." And then there are other people who also went over there to look at the land. And those people come back and say, "Yeah, there is milk and honey. There are grapes the size of a man's hand. But there are also giants and monsters in the land." So what do you think the people decide? What do you think they decide? There are these monsters and these horrible things in this land that are running this land, but this is a land that's been promised to them. So what do you think? What decision do you think they make? A lot of people say don't go, but ultimately they end up going. They end up going into this land, and they're fighting these monsters. They know that this is a scary place, but why do they choose to go? Because where they are going to is better than where they came from. Now, this is the most difficult challenge that leaders, people like us, have to face. Because this is what Joshua and Caleb had to face in dealing with these people. Because, again, I said Moses was the man. He talked to bushes, for crying out loud. Right? He had pillars of smoke and fire leading them. He got what? Free food all the time, coming from heaven, and birds coming out of nowhere. So he had all of this stuff. Moses was the dude. And so they get to the Promised Land, and what do you think Joshua and Caleb's leadership challenge is? To do the same. People expect the same thing. Well, Moses wouldn't have done it like this. Moses would have had this bread for us. Moses, blah, 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 blah. But the interesting thing about it was that he had to remind them of something that they had forgotten. Which was the fact that Moses was dead. Which means we can't do what Moses did because he's dead. A lot of us have forgotten the fact that Dr. King is dead. So what does that mean? What did that mean for the children of Israel? If they were going to take over this land, if they were going to conquer this land of milk and honey, who had to do it? They had to do it. When we sit around and we think about the I Have a Dream speech and the great stuff that happened in the 60s, I want to say thank you for people who contributed to that. I want to say thank you for all those who did that for me on my behalf. But I have to tell you that their time is over. Will there be another Dr. King? No. The combination of his DNA was unique. Boom. Will there be another Moses? Will there be another Gandhi? Will there be another Mother Teresa? And my answer is no, because their DNA was so unique that they